Yeah, I got this wrong, Carl. I understood this was a shallow excursion into new ideas. Well, I thought this was a new excursion into shallow ideas. And we'll do the best we can. Anyway, we can start the new lines. I'm not taking 20 seconds with this.
Rob, you're out of time.
In the late 1970s, early 80s, I was Naval Architecture Section Head for Gibbs and Cox in Washington Division, and we did design and engineering for the U.S. Navy, including DDG 51 and minesweepers. We hired the program manager for the Marine Corps' LARC program. LARC was the successor to World War II DUC, which has killed far too many amphibious assault troops and tourists, by the way. But this was an excellent craft. The only problem is it's 10 feet wide and too wide for the rows. But the program manager came to work for us, Captain Grigor, and he talked us into the next generation logistics program for the Marine Corps. We got a budget together and made a nice proposal, and we called it the Stark. They laughed at us, and yeah, well, but we learned a lot about aluminum welded amphibious things. Anyway, a few years later, after finishing my program engineering with the Navies, I got a fiberglass mine hunter program. I became an independent naval architect, and I started doing quite a bit of subchapter T work, Coast Guard certified tourist vessels. Here's an example of a fiberglass one, the Thriller. And the original naval architect didn't do things in structures. This was his first fiberglass boat, so I had a lot of work. And I have since redesigned this thing in aluminum. Not that aluminum is better than fiberglass, but we came out with a couple of versions of that. But I do a lot of work for the Coast Guard, with the Coast Guard for tourist operators. And it's carried me for the last few years. This is an example that started out as a Haisu cat, but the Thriller powerboat operators really need this boat, and we're going to be selling a few of them pretty shortly. But one of the things I got involved with, this is a 52-foot, 50-knot harness and drive thing. I've also been doing quite a few crew boats, and this is probably the world's ugliest boat ever designed, but it paid the bills, and it was exactly what the South American oil service craft operator wanted. And we'll be talking about this during our aluminum paper on Wednesday for kit boats, but this is Coast Guard certified. Back to the aluminum welded LARC. You know, this would make a great passenger boat for the tourist industry in the United States to replace those scary and positively dangerous ducks. But it's too wide. Here's an example of being operated in Iceland to their Coast Guard requirements. And here's one in Newfoundland at, I think this is in St. John's Harbor, is it? But they are able to get permits to operate on the road. In the US, we're not quite as lucky. Well, I was approached by an operator who owned 2 of these LARCs in Daytona Beach. He could not get Coast Guard, he could get Coast Guard certified, but he couldn't get something that would operate over the road. And he hired me to design an 8-foot wide, 8.5-foot wide thing that would get DOT passenger bus certification so we could go over the road. Trouble is, you can't make something 8.5 feet wide stable enough to satisfy the U.S. Coast Guard with a load of passengers on board. Now remember, our competition was building all these World War II welded steel, low freeboard, positively dangerous, high maintenance, corrosion prone. I can't say enough terrible things about these, but they're all over the place. And I designed for this character in Daytona Beach a replacement, all fiberglass. It has no steel in it excepting for French military vehicle running gear to replace this duck. In case you don't know what a duck looks like, you've been reading the news, there's a good example of the original form of it. And that was actually designed by Sparkman Stevens during World War II. Anyway, this is what I came up with. We called it the trolley boat. I know it's kind of trite, but he wanted something that looked like the old-time trolley buses that go around various towns. And it's all fiberglass. It won't corrode. And we had actually built 12 of these and got them all 11 of them Coast Guard certified and DOT approved as over-the-road 55-mile-an-hour passenger buses. It's the weirdest thing I have ever designed, and it looks like the little tugboat that could. They're really tacky, but we still couldn't meet the stability requirements. So you see those little inflatable pontoons on the side, courtesy of Wings Inflatable. The Coast Guard commanding officer at the Marine Safety Office was involved in a lot of whale watching craft in the Pacific Northwest, and he was enamored of this inflatable ribs, and talked me into integrating his idea of what would give us the additional buoyancy and breadth to meet the righting arm curves. And sure enough, we did it. Meanwhile, we've got a couple of competitors who jumped into the market. This one is called the Hydra Terra. Didn't study his Greek because Hydra is a stinging nettlefish type of thing. But this is aluminum hull with a pickup cab stuck on a running gear, steel running gear from a truck. Well, there's 1.5 volts between the running gear of the steel truck and the aluminum hull, and you can imagine how long they last in seawater. Meanwhile, the Australians are operating some of these larks, and we have to keep going back to the lark as a pretty good example of something that does work, and coincidentally will meet the U.S. Coast Guard regulations. This is another Australian example, and they work. They're stable. Boy, they're ugly. And I can't say my trolley boat is any prettier, but we're working on a new generation of that, which should come out pretty shortly. It's right here in St. Petersburg. And there's another one of our competitors. I forget what this particular one is called, but it's wide enough and low enough that it does meet the Coast Guard requirements with the lower CG and that sort of thing. The operator who hired me defrauded 3 complete sets of investors, and he didn't end up in jail, but he lost the company to 2 cardiologists in Wyoming, who then came back to me. They had me testify in court against the original character, who was living out of the country right now. He was a bit of a bandit. This was the Big Apple Ducks, and I really wanted to see this one go, but we fastened the French military vehicle suspension system in this girder that was mated up to that, and I specified Chalk Fast Orange to do that. He substituted 3M 5200 because it was cheaper, not realizing there was no structural performance for the 5200. Here it is with the pontoon deflated, and Carl, I threw this at the end. I cheated. That's my 21st, but Kermit lost his boat.